In this episode on the Tech Maniac HD channel, Pavel removes the factory-applied paste.
Oh, damn.
He applies a different paste.
Oh, damn.
He cuts the thermal pad by hand.
Oh, damn. Damn. Honeywell PTM7950 has been making a big splash in the IT world lately. Some people say it's a thermal pad, others claim it's a paste. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in the middle, because at room temperature, yes, PTM7950 behaves like a typical thermal pad and doesn't resemble thermal paste at all. However, it is made from a phase change material, which means its state changes under the influence of temperature. I'm applying the thermal pad.
Honeywell Thermal Pad.
Let's heat it up a little.
We're seeing about 80, maybe even 90 degrees, and let's check what its consistency looks like. Very soft. Very soft. Oh, you can even spread it like a paste, look.
Blah blah, sure, it's an interesting gimmick, but does it really work? We're going to check that today.
Buckle up, baby, are you kidding me?
The topic is also interesting because PTM7950 isn't aimed at us, the consumers. In reality, it's a solution designed only for specialized industrial devices or robotics, basically anywhere you can't afford downtime or extra, and honestly pretty pointless, costs related to replacing thermal paste. After all, those lose their properties after a few months or even a year or so. On the other hand, phase change material behaves quite the opposite. The more cycles it goes through, the more effective it becomes. So it turns out that space technology was once again carefully hidden from us. And what can you do about it? Nothing, that's just life. But is there really anything to get excited about? To answer that question, I'll test the most popular thermal pastes. The ultra-cheap Chinese GD900 and GD100, 900-1, which is the improved version, GD007, and also the ridiculously expensive Thermal Grizzly Cryonaut and Gelid. Or if you prefer, Gelid, GC Extreme, and I'll run all the tests on a brand new, never-before-opened card from PNY. This will also let us verify if the factory-applied thermal paste by manufacturers is really as bad as they say. This is Pavel, and you're watching the Tech Maniac HD channel. Let's get started. PureVPN is a service specializing in providing security and anonymity for its users. You may not know this, but your internet provider records and stores all information about your online activity for several years. Websites you visit and torrents you download or upload can be accessed later, so if you want privacy, consider the PureVPN service. Thanks to 256-bit encryption, your network connection will be more secure than ever before. VPN will also expand the catalog on your streaming service, like Amazon Prime. After all, you pay quite a lot for these services, and users located in Poland have almost half of the content blocked compared to what's available in other regions. By connecting to a server in the US or UK, you'll bypass these ridiculous restrictions and get full access to what you're already paying for. PureVPN is a premium service, so it's not exactly cheap. However, by choosing the 2-year plan, you save 82%. If you enter the code TechManiacHD at checkout, you'll get an additional 10% discount, bringing the price down to about 8 PLN per month. PureVPN lets you use the service on 10 devices at the same time, so there's nothing stopping you from splitting the cost with a few friends, which means it comes out to just 80 groszy per device. You can find more details in the description and in the pinned comment. Let's start by introducing the equipment I'll be using for the tests. PNY's design isn't seen very often in Poland, which is a real shame because the model I have here is extremely interesting. It's the RTX 4070 Ti with the catchy name XLR8 Gaming Verto Epic -X RGB Triple Fan. And it's also worth mentioning that the version I'm testing today is the overclocked OC version, but I guess that didn't fit in the name. Maybe they have some kind of character limit. And as we all know, the longer the name, the more FPS you get. Jokes aside, though it's funny what the PNY marketing department is doing, and really, what all manufacturers' marketing departments are doing, we're not here today to make fun of the names of individual models. The card, its performance, and how it behaves with different thermal interfaces are what we're interested in today. Looking at it from the outside, we'll notice that it's quite a chunky card, at least for a 285-watt TGP. The length alone shows that it won't fit in every case, but honestly, it's the thickness that surprised me the most. That's because it requires removing the third slot cover from the case. The Hall of Fame, which is a dream come true for many gamers, fits into just 2 slots. And even though this card is designed for extreme overclocking and breaking world records, the offering from PNY doesn't pale in comparison. I would even say that visually, maybe except for the color, this one looks just as interesting. Besides, why pretend? I really like this style and aggressive design, but that's just my subjective observation. Getting back to specifics, the PCB itself is very short here, which allowed the manufacturer to make a huge cutout in the backplate at the rear, which of course helps with better heat dissipation, and that's actually very important for us. When measuring the performance of thermal pads or pastes, we don't want to be limited by inefficient cooling. After unpacking the new card, I put it in the computer and let it run for about an hour. Then I started testing it with the factory thermal paste applied by PNY. These results will give us a reference point and we'll finally learn the truth about whether the thermal paste applied by manufacturers is really low quality. I've always wondered about this because I've often heard opinions that manufacturers really cut costs in this area. On one hand, it might make no sense at all because who else but the manufacturers should care the most about the quietest operation and the lowest possible temperatures. On the other hand, according to unofficial information, graphics card manufacturers operate on really minimal margins. The cheapest, most budget-oriented models yield barely a 1% profit. The more advanced designs allow for up to 23%. Considering operational costs, marketing, support, or heaven forbid, possible returns, manufacturers really don't have an easy life. And if by using lower quality thermal paste they save, let's say, $1 per card, then by selling 1 million cards, how much do they save? $1 million. Simple as that. So let's take a look at the paste used by PNY in this particular unit. I don't think anyone will be surprised that it looks fresh. The serial number shows that the card was manufactured on February 28, 2023, which is just over 2 months ago, and so far it has worked for no more than 2 hours. It's always better to use a bit more paste than too little, and here we can see that tendency as well, but that's not a problem. It's enough to gently remove the excess with a dry paper towel, both from the heatsink and from the processor itself. We must handle the PCB components carefully and avoid damaging the fragile silicon edges. Next, we soak the towel with isopropyl alcohol and clean the processor surface until it shines. We don't need to worry too much about the transistors. Leaving a bit of paste between them doesn't hurt anything, but pulling one out is definitely not recommended. Let's start by applying the cheapest paste from this set. Of course, I'm talking about GD900. You can buy such a huge tube for a ridiculously low price. As always, you'll find the current prices in the description below. Its cost, at least until recently, was 36 groszy per gram. And later, we'll compare it to Thermal Grizzly Cryonaut, which costs about 39 zlotys per gram. Since the price is 107 times higher, will the results be 107 times better? Well, we'll see about that. I decided to manually spread the paste over the surface of the processor with a spatula. At least in the case of graphics cards, this method is possible. It's actually the safest. When using the piece-size method, the paste usually doesn't reach the corners. In desktop computer processors, this doesn't matter that much because the cores and the entire I/O of the chip are located close to the center, and there's basically nothing on the edges of the IHS. We're only increasing the surface area for heat absorption. In the case of GPUs, the cores are spread across the entire silicon surface. Leaving even a small edge uncovered can significantly raise the temperature. This can lead to highly unbalanced fan operation and sometimes even damage the graphics card. So here really, listen, we're not cutting any corners. Silicon-based pastes have a fairly thin consistency, which makes them easy to spread. GD900 might actually be a bit too runny. 900-1 is already a little thicker. On the other hand, GD007 is a bit like custard cream, so its thickness is just right. It's fairly thick, but if you give it a bit more time, you can still spread a thin, even layer over the surface of the component. Gellit also falls into the group that's pleasant to apply. On the other hand, Thermal Grizzly Cryonaut is very dry. And spreading it with a spatula like this, especially when the paste starts to roll up, is one of the less pleasant tasks. Of course, you can warm it up in hot water before applying, but it's still much less convenient to use. However, let's talk about the Honeywell Thermal Pad now, because after all, it's the most interesting thing here. The first problem is the difficulty in finding the original product. There are plenty of fakes, and it's easy to get fooled. I managed to buy the original on AliExpress, and I'll leave links to the versions with and without tools in the description. Although I didn't really need them, I wanted to check if these tools were worth anything, and the screwdriver, yes, it would be suitable for taking the card apart. The brush, on the other hand, isn't really needed for anything, and these, let's say, caps are too small for European fingers. After a minute or two, I started feeling tingling, and the blood stopped flowing to my fingertips. If you don't have isopropyl alcohol, then wipes soaked with it might actually come in handy here. You have to remember that the pad is very delicate and can be easily damaged. Next, you need to measure the core, being careful not to pinch or chip anything. Then, transfer the measurements onto the pad, mark it, cut it. We remove the protective film from one side, and we place it, making sure that no dust, foreign objects, or grease from our fingers remains on any of the surfaces. And what happened? It turned out terribly. Sorry, but recording the cutting process while half hunched over the table resulted in such a mess. The cut pad turned out to be too short. But that's what happens when you look at the camera instead of what you're doing. Off camera, I cut the pad again. This time it turned out well. Now you can see the moment when I peel up the second layer. Look, the layers of protective film. And here too, you have to be super careful. We definitely don't want to poke the delicate processor silicon with a sharp tool or damage the thermal pad. Even if we end up with some waves, we can try to straighten them out using a plastic spatula. If you place the heatsink, that is the radiator, directly onto the pad arranged like this, it could cause the folds to bend, resulting in uneven pressure. The temperature should fix it, but I prefer to gently smooth it and remove air bubbles. As you can see for yourselves, working with the Honeywell Thermal Pad is simply less practical. You can help yourself a bit by hardening it in the fridge, but thinner pastes definitely win here, at least in terms of convenience. Now all that's left is to put the beautiful card into the computer and take the final measurements. And we definitely need to discuss the results because at first glance they don't seem surprising at all. But don't worry, as always, the devil is in the details. First of all, the factory thermal paste isn't bad at all. How it will perform after a year or two is a completely different topic, but at the same time, we've proven here that replacing fresh paste with another fresh paste doesn't make any sense. Moving on, although pastes like GD900 and GD901 are slightly worse than the factory one, it's really not that bad. After all, remember that these are super cheap contraptions costing less than bottled water at the Polish seaside. Sure, we have that 1 extra degree on the hotspot, but from my previous tests lasting almost 8 or 9 months, it turned out that GD900 practically doesn't dry out, and even after a longer period still maintains high performance. Refreshing the card costs just a few cents, and it should easily last for 2 years without any problems. On the other hand, GD007 is surprising in a negative way. This is the best proof that the RML conductivity rating only plays a partial role. The consistency and how well the paste is able to fill the microscopic irregularities of both surfaces are just as important. And that's why we should never look only at the value expressed in watts per meter Kelvin, but at the overall result. Gellit is a product that I have been using for at least 15 years. It is many times more expensive than GD brand pastes, but still twice as cheap as Thermal Grizzly Cryonaut. Gellit records nearly 2 degrees lower on the GPU and 3 degrees better on the hotspot compared to its more expensive rival. You're probably wondering why this happens since Cryonaut has 12.5 W per meter Kelvin and Gellit only 8.5 W. I suppose that here too, the thinner consistency of Gellit allows it to fill micro irregularities better and thus transfer heat more efficiently compared to the hard and dry Grizzly paste. And that brings us to the Honeywell Thermal Pad. I performed 2 measurements. The first one I started with a freshly applied pad. I waited only 10 minutes after starting the system so that any possible background processes wouldn't mess up our results. And it turns out that some kind of black magic is really happening here. 66.3 degrees Celsius is the best result so far. The hotspot is also doing quite well. However, Gellit performed better here. Before we move on to the results after the full bedding in period, which is after a few days, let's take a look at the fan speeds. Indeed, we achieved both lower temperatures and quieter operation. That's really nice, but for this thermal pad to reach its full performance, it supposedly needs to be properly heated up and cooled down several times. Fortunately or unfortunately, the PNY firmware, combined with such a massive heatsink and light airflow, never allowed the card to go over 71 degrees even with the case fan stopped. With the help of MSI Afterburner, I decided to lock the fan speed on the card itself to the minimum, which is 30%. I slightly roasted it at over 83 degrees so that the pad would fit as well as possible, and then I repeated the tests. Here are the results. 0.3 degrees less on the GPU, 0.5 degrees less on the hotspot, with a simultaneous but minimal drop in fan speed. It turns out that the Honeywell PTM7950 thermal pad really does offer better performance compared to standard thermal paste. Maybe working with it is a bit more annoying, but in the end, how much time will it actually cost us? 5 minutes more to carefully cut and remove the protective films? With all the preparation for the operation, cleaning and disassembly, it's really next to nothing, but the biggest advantage of the Honeywell Thermal Pad isn't actually lower temperatures. Of course that's nice, but the main reason we should choose it for everything is its longevity. Apparently it doesn't dry out at all. Tests were conducted where the PTM7950 was baked at 150 degrees Celsius for 1000 hours. And as a result, its performance remained exactly the same. What's more, 1000 cycles of changing the temperature from minus 55 degrees Celsius to plus 125 not only didn't show any degradation, but such harsh conditions actually increased its thermal impedance. For comparison, the performance of Thermal Grizzly Cryonaut drops just a few months after application and gradually changes. I've emphasized several times already that Cryonaut is not suitable for home users. It is intended for extreme overclocking, meaning it can withstand sub-zero temperatures between the pot of liquid nitrogen and a highly overclocked processor drawing 650 watts. In the same way, the fact that slick tires are great for the track and Formula 1 doesn't mean they'll be just as good a choice for a golf driving in its natural environment. If this phase change miracle really maintains such high performance after a year, 2, or even 10 years, it will turn out that all other thermal pastes are simply a waste of time and money. So, will you only choose the PTM thermal pad from now on, or is there still someone who wants to stick with pastes? If so, let us know why. The comment section is open. Also, remember that you can still join our exclusive server on Discord. All you need to do is support the channel either through Patronite or directly on YouTube. More details are in the description. If you enjoyed this video, you'll find plenty of similar ones on the website www.techmaniahd.pl. See you in the next one.